So.
Now, there's a lot out there in society with regards to romance and romance novels, and for the viewers out there watching right now, if you could maybe define what you're saying about true romance, because the idea of a lot of romance is, the Harlequin romance novel type thing, which, a lot of those are just, I mean, they're I would say right out of the pit of hell. I've never read them, but that's what I've heard about them. But there's a lot with regards to romance in today's society that always seems to tend towards the impure, always seems to tend towards the immodest or the vain and so forth. What you're saying about this, and with regards to what Dietrich von Hildebrand has written about true godly romance, what would you say more specifically or more defining of true godly romance?
Well, in a certain sense, we don't need to be afraid of romance in a way, because once we move on to romance, in a certain sense, we've moved, once this, you start talking about romance, you've moved the discussion onto Catholic territory, whether we realize it or not. I mean, those of us who are unpacking the theology of the body, we know we've got romance on our side. You want to talk about romance? We have romance in our church, And
like you said, it's an image of divine love for the human.
Exactly,
right?
and everybody is hungry for that.
Right.
I mean, maybe they don't think they don't realize they can find it in church, but everyone loves a good story.
Right.
Everyone loves a good romance. And C.S. Lewis he says that, romance is not just about the guy getting the girl. It's broader than that, And he and Tolkien, what they wrote, they called romance. And G.K. Chesterton, he was all about romance, even though it wasn't just about the guy getting the girl or the girl getting the guy.
And I'm like Doug, I haven't read the romance novels,
That's
but I was
okay.
reading Waking Rose, and I like the way you did have it rooted in the natural. You talked about the character's natural reactions and longings to be with the other and everything.
Yeah.
It seemed like a very natural thing, yet these people trying to live their faith and trying to be pure and things.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a concern, Regina, that with
on,
regards to our teenagers who are growing up and striving for godliness, striving for virtue, being comfortable with the reality that there is a natural order to attraction to the opposite sex, courtship, true love, true romance, true preparation for marriage, and then a true understanding of the heroic sacrifices and love that is in a good godly marriage. And I find that there's a real emptiness in so much of our secular society. There are elements of truth in a lot of, and you find in some stories and in movies and such, but I mean, some of the famous movies out there, Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice and some of these things, I've seen bits and pieces, and you find elements of that in there. But what we're talking about here then is something that goes deeper to the core of Christ in his relationship with mankind.
Yeah.
Okay, and it sounds like that's what you're trying to get at with your idea of a romance, is really finding it rooted in Christ, his sacrifice, his love for mankind.
Oh, definitely. And I could say, actually, one girl wrote to me, there's a bunch of my fans who have their own forum now, like on the website. It's the Fairy Tale Novel Forum. I think it's fairytaleforum.com. It's on my website, on fairytalenovels.com. But and I didn't start it; they started it themselves. And one of the girls wrote to me and said, am I seeing things wrong? But are there really Christ images in your book? She's like, every time when I read about the guy doing this and the time when he laid down his life for the girl, did you mean that to be like a Christ figure? And I'm like, darn, you figured me out. You're not supposed, I was hoping you weren't going to notice. I thought I'd get under your radar. But yeah, in a really real sense, each of the heroes in my book, each of the princes in the fairy tale really is a Christ figure. And I'm hoping that kids will see that and love that, and that they'll recognize him when they meet him.
Can we also talk about practical tips? Because one thing I want to do with this show, too, is a lot of young people probably want to be writers out there. How do they hone their skills? What should they do? What tips and advice would you give them?
Wow. Well, it's being a writer, it's definitely a vocation. I'll say that much.
Does God have anything to do with it?
It does. He does. Yeah. He does. The good thing about writing, I have to say, because a lot of us, in our society, we can get really hung up on talent. And, nobody knows that better than that. You can spend a lot of time worrying excessively about, well, do I have the talent to make it? Do I, has God really given me, has really called me? I said, well, the good thing about writing, this is good news for me and for other would-be writers, is that I don't think writing is an art. I think writing is a craft. Well, what's the difference between an art and a craft? A craft is something you can learn, and you can get better at it just by doing it. So if you want to be a writer, the main thing is just to get in there at the grindstone and work at it. And it takes a lot of work to finish a novel, a lot of hard, lonely...
One of your books, you said you rewrote 14, times? Is that right?
Yeah, the second one. Yeah, the second one.
Yeah,
Blackest Night. Yeah, go ahead.
Here we go.
Go ahead, I got the pile. Actually, I wrote the book, and I read it, and it was not a satisfying read. I mean, you have to write the book, and then you have to read it as though you're a reader. And as soon as you start to get bored, as soon as you start to skip words, then you're like, okay, I did something wrong. You got to start rewriting at that point. Yeah, and I reworked the plot. I didn't rewrite it 14 times, but I reworked the plot completely 14 times. You can find it on my website if you look for the hidden link. But I have like secret Easter eggs.
We had Michael Bryan on the show not too long ago, and he said he wrote a book that he never really published until 20 years later.
Oh, yeah.
So do you find that where you've written something and then you go back to it years later?
Yes.
And then you find maybe some way to rework it or do something with it?
Each of my first 3 books took me from the time I first got the idea to the time it was actually published 10 years. Wow. I'm getting faster. I wrote this book in 5 years. So.
Now, you also speak about dedicating your skills and talents.
Yeah, I said the first thing, if you are discerning becoming a writer, if you're trying to do that, I said one habit that has helped me a lot is to take your writing journal, take your laptop, and write in front of the Eucharist. You know, just take it in the chapel and write. And people say, well, you know, shouldn't I only do that if I'm writing a book about God? You know, I mean, like, doesn't that seem a little secular? I mean, I don't want to be irreverent. I said, well, you know, as a writer, every time you're writing, you are in front of God. You know, like, he can see everything you write anyhow. So I said, do that for yourself. Like, make a conscious dedication of your talent to God. At some point in your life, you should just go before the tabernacle and just give your talent to God. And I say, you know, meditate on that parable of the talents, you know. And I said, see yourself as the guy with the 2 talents. You don't know if you're Michelangelo. You don't know if you're the next, you know, bestseller. You don't know how much talent God has given you. See yourself as the guy with the 2 talents. He's in there for a reason. That's you. You know, just give your talent, whatever you think it is, to God, and then just go with it, you know, where you will.
Okay, we have to take a short break, and we'll be back with Regina Doman and speaking about teen fiction. So don't go away.